Thank you everybody for coming today. Statements is a great follow-up to the session we did last month on receipts. So diving right in, quick reminder that this is not a training session. This is for informational purposes. If you like what you see here today, you think, hey, we're not using statements the way that we could be, I want some more information, some more training, do encourage you, if you are participating in the UGC conference this year, there will be an actual training session on statements as part of conference. If you are not attending conference, this is something we also provide as a standalone training. Do reach out, let us know. Hopefully, though, in today's session, you'll get a bit more information, some ideas around how you can make the process simpler if you're using statements. And if you aren't using statements, you'll be able to evaluate whether this is something that you would like to implement and start using. Okay. So why? Why issue statements from Andar? Few key things. You have the flexibility to indicate which transactions are billable and when. Okay, so rather than pulling a data mining operation to say, hey, who still owes us money, manually negotiating all of that, at the transaction level, you can actually say, hey, if this particular transaction isn't paid by a certain date, we need to be issuing a statement to these folks to collect that money. Okay. In that same regard, you're getting up-to-date data on payments received and outstanding balance. So again, no manual manipulation to figure out, well, they said they wanted to be billed quarterly. They pledged $10,000. That means every statement's going to be $2,500. And then you realize that they've actually already paid you the second payment. And now you've irritated somebody. They've told you they've already sent it in. A copy of the statement and a communication log, if you so desire, are saved to the account for easy access. So when you generate statements through Andar, it does track that on the account under the communications statements subtab. So you'll be able to see every time a statement has been issued for that individual or organization. And you can also tell the system to create a communication log indicating that a statement has been sent, which makes it really nice for your, resource development team or other teams that are outside of finance to know what's being communicated with that account and what follow-up is being done. No more manual mail merges. This is my personal favorite. I know templates and style sheets can be a bit daunting, but once that is set up, you no longer have to do the duplication of effort of running a report from Andar and then doing a manual mail merge in another tool to then just go back and tell Andar that you have in fact sent those statements. It's all built in together. And you have the option to either print your statements or you can have the system email them out to your donors. Okay, so those are your key whys, why you want to be doing this out of Andar. Looking into the who gets billed. Okay, so several factors determine who will, oh, I missed a word there. I said, it says receipt. It's a statement. Several factors determine who will get a statement. So number one, not all transaction types are billable. Okay, so do be mindful of that when you're entering donations or pledges into the system, that certain transaction types are deemed by the system to not be billable. A frequent one with that, there are actually transaction types that say do not bill. Okay, so those ones will not generate a statement by default. If you aren't sure if a particular transaction type is what we consider billable, you can go look at the transaction attributes tables. So here's a little example here of a transaction attribute for a particular billable gift. And there is a checkbox there that says, this can be billed and who will be billed. So for example, employee payroll, even though it's an individual who is giving the gift, it's usually billable to the organization. So if I run statements, that is going to pull into the organization's statement rather than being directed to the employee themselves. Whereas an individual to be billed transaction will generate a statement for that individual. Okay, so if you ever need clarification on whether a transaction type is billable, check those attributes tables and you'll be able to see that. Only pledges with a billing schedule trigger a statement. That's another thing I see. Sometimes people will create a billable transaction, but this billing schedule will be set to do not bill. That overrides whatever the default behavior is for that transaction. So do be mindful of that. You want those billing schedules to be correct. So if I indicate I'd like to be billed monthly, this should be monthly. Best practice, jumping ahead of things, is to have some standardized expectations at your organization. So for example, payroll. If you are sending out statements reminding organizations that their payroll submissions are due, is that typically done quarterly? Do you have different arrangements with different organizations? This billing schedule should reflect that. Okay. Billing dates. So that's step 2 of this. If I set up a billing schedule of monthly, then I set a billing start date. So when does this become effective, this monthly? So if I've got a monthly billing schedule, I can choose to have it start today. I can choose to have it start in January 1st of the following year so that there's no overlap with their current gift, etc. All 3 of these impact whether a statement will be generated and when that statement will actually pop up in the process. Okay, so even though I have, thank you, Luke. Even though I have a billing schedule of monthly, if that's not popping up when I run my statements, check to see when the billing start date is. Maybe that was entered incorrectly, or the person, without you realizing, had indicated, hey, please don't start billing me until July. I'm out of the country the next 6 months. Start billing me in July and I'll make a payment then. Andar won't pull in their statement until that time. Okay. Luke, do we have any questions about any of these, the who gets billed or the why so far?
Not at the current moment.
Okay. All right. Everybody, quick reminder, if you do have questions, add them under the little questions icon there. Happy to answer them as we go along. Okay. Next section of who gets billed. You can narrow this down by the transaction details. Okay. So when you actually create your statements, so if you've never run statements before, there is a create statements job. And you have several different selections here. So the top 3 here, we are looking at which billing schedules do we want to generate a statement for. So maybe we only run the monthly ones every month, and then we have a schedule for the quarterly or other options. Do we want to run this for all campaign accounts or just our annual campaign? And are there specific transaction types that we want to pull? So maybe we're doing a different statement template and we're sending out again a statement to all of our organizations that have outstanding employee payroll. I can narrow this down to just generate statements based on employee payroll so that I can use a different template. Okay. So all of those things allow us to fine tune who we're generating statements for at any particular time. We can also select by account. So there are options here that say, I want to run this for all accounts in the database. So it's still going to look at what's on the transaction and your settings here, but it's going to do it system-wide. You can run for a specific account warehouse. So maybe you just want to do your Tocqueville donors. You're just generating statements for Tocqueville donors today. Again, maybe they have a different statement template. Maybe you have a different agreement with them. You can put them all into an account warehouse and run it that way. You can run by account. So most common example of that is where somebody reaches out and says, hey, I need an invoice for this. You can run a one-off statement for that organization or individual without having to do the larger job. You can also omit accounts in a warehouse. So if you have transactions that have, billing schedules and billing start dates and stuff on them, but you don't want to bill them any further for those particular gifts, you could put them into a warehouse, still run the entire job, but say, hey, but don't send to these people, something's happened, and we don't want to do that anymore. And then finally, you can run by event account. So this has actually, I've had a lot of tickets about this over the last year. Sometimes you have sponsors or people who've purchased tickets and need to be billed for them. You can, again, do a separate billing just for things related to that specific event. Then you also have some flexibility around what to base the statement on. So do you want to base it on the outstanding balance, on the billing date? So there's some settings down here that say run for anybody who has anything billable this month. So even if it's the 10th, but my next billing schedule date is the 15th, it's still going to pull me in, allows me to kind of batch everything, get it in the mail. Run everybody with a current or past due amount. So even if my next billing date isn't until next month, if I didn't pay last month's statement, it'll pull me back in, or pull anybody with an outstanding balance. So regardless of my billing schedule, it's going to pull me in and say, yes, anybody who still owes us money, we're gonna look at that. Okay. So lots of flexibility to narrow it down. You could do a billing statement for every single individual in the database who has an outstanding balance, and their transaction allows you to bill them. Or you could get as granular as sending one person at a time upon their request. Okay. So moving along, so what do they receive? If you are generating your statements within Andar, there is an option to just generate a CSV and do a manual mail merge on the side. So even if you don't want to set up a template in Andar, highly encourage you to use that. Again, the benefit is it still tracks in Andar that you sent a statement and puts that information on the person or organization's account. So it's still being tracked and you are getting as up-to-date information as possible. Try hard not to use data mining operations and things for generating statements. Again, there's just too many variables. Use the functionality that's built in. If, however, you have the internal capacity to do this, highly recommend creating templates right within Andar. Okay, so you can have as many templates as you like. Don't overcomplicate it. But you could, for example, have a different statement template for a specific event that you were sending things out where you recognize, thank you for purchasing tickets for this event. Here is your outstanding balance. Here's how you make payment. Okay, so you can have different templates. And they can be, again, they can be super simple, like a form letter. They can be more complex to where you have a detachable section at the bottom that they put back in an envelope and it fits in a return window envelope. Really up to you. We've seen everything. Important thing in your templates, use note variables. Okay, so for example, if you are creating a separate template for your event statements, you don't necessarily have to create a separate one for every one of your events. Instead, use the note variable that pulls in the name of the event and the date of the event so that you can say, thank you for registering for X that is happening on this date. Here's how much you owe us. Okay. So again, it reduces the amount of manual data manipulation that you have to do. Okay. Apply a style sheet. So a style sheet, if you are using pre-printed letterhead, can just help to format the contents of your template so that they fit properly on your letterhead. You can help it to the address box, for example, to line up with a window on an envelope. Or if you want to be able to email out your statements, or you want to print them and have the header, footer, your logo, everything already built in, you can also incorporate that into a style sheet. Okay, so banners and logos, pretty things, or even just the most basic, I just want my spacing to be right so that I don't have this funny thing cutting off on the side of the page. Okay, so style sheets are important. On this note, we do have a project going on right now that I'm hoping we'll be able to share with everybody in the next couple of months, where we are recreating and updating our sample templates and receipt templates in Andar. So those samples will then be available to all of our customers free of charge, just part of the software, but hopefully create a more user-friendly experience where you can just copy the existing sample, update your text a little bit, maybe swap out your logo in the style sheet and be ready to go. So very excited about that. We will still offer custom style sheets and help with templates and things like that, but we recognize that the sample statements and receipts that are in the database right now are a little outdated and need a little bit of love. So we are working on that. If you have any questions about that going forward, do let us know. We can provide some more information, but we'll make sure we get that out in a newsletter or something once we have those available. Okay. So then the final piece here, selecting your statement. When you are in that create job that I was just showing, on the output tab, you have the option to choose which statement template you would like to use. Okay, so again, set up your conditions to say, hey, if we have a separate template for our Tocqueville donors, I am just running this for the people in this warehouse and they get this template, versus I am running this for our, bourbon tasting event and this is the template. They use the general event template. So you have that flexibility to run narrower parameters and select your template in real time as you're creating the statements. But you want to have those statements pre-created, so you're just selecting each time and not manually creating a new template every time you want to run a set of statements. Okay. Luke, any questions so far?
Yes, we have a few actually. First one coming from Kimberly here. Do we have to have MIG to print and email statements from Andar?
Ooh. I feel like you don't. I don't think you do for printing, but you might for email. I may be a liar. I can find out, Kimberly. We'll make note of your name and your details. If you can just pop your email over there, and I'll confirm for sure and let you know. I'm so used to everybody having MIG at this point that I sometimes blur the lines of what's MIG and what's not MIG. So, all right. Other questions, Luke?
Yes, we have one from Bob Nelson, which was, how does Andar calculate amount due?
Oh, okay. So it looks at the amount that was pledged versus what has come in to date and compares it with the billing schedule. So, for example, if I pledged $1,200 and I say to bill me monthly, and this is now the third billing schedule. If I made an overpayment last month and paid, let's say instead of paying $100 last month, I paid $150. This month, it's going to recognize that I owe $50. So it's cumulative based on their billing schedule, but then it takes out anything that has already been paid. So that's kind of the nice thing about doing it in Andar, is it does those calculations for you based on the billing schedule, the billing start date, what their initial pledge was, and how much they've paid to date. And you can also, important note, you can have a statement outline multiple years at the same time. So maybe I still owe $200 for my 2024 pledge, and now I'm starting to get billed for my 2025 pledge. You could have both of those on there. And if you're using the ePledge portal, which we're going to talk about in a second, for click and pay, I can actually pay off both balances in one payment if I want, and Andar would create the two different payment transactions for the different campaign years. Other questions?
Absolutely. We have one from Charnita here, which is, how do you set up statements to be emailed?
Ooh, so that is on the output tab of the create job. there's a section there, and I would show you my screen, but it's a bit of a nightmare to go back and forth between screens. But on that output tab of the create statements job, you indicate, do you want to generate PDFs or do you want to create a CSV? When you say you want to generate PDFs, you also have a print PDF in envelope or send by email option. And if you check send by email, it will then ask you, do you want to attach the statement as an attachment to an email? And if so, you grab your email template, you tell it which email template to use. Or do you want to embed the statement in the body of the email? Okay. That's the one I typically prefer for statements. It just puts all the details right into the body of the email. So you would have all the contents already written in there. It just stamps it into the email itself. The reason I like that one the best is because I can then have a link in my email that takes them to ePledge if I have it, and they can just pay their statement or their outstanding balance right away. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But so it's just a setting on your output. You tell it which option you want to use. The beautiful thing about if you try to email the statements out, if you have accounts in there that do not have a valid email address, the system will just create a PDF for you to print. You don't have to divide those out manually. The system will do that for you. Okay. All right. Other questions?
Fantastic. We have one from Cindy here. If there is no billing schedule on the transaction, but it's on the donor's record, will it pull it from their account? And is there an order in which the billing schedule is pulled?
No. So if there is no billing schedule on the transaction, it will not pull in. So a billing schedule on the person's account is a default billing schedule. So what that tells the system is when you add a transaction for this person, what should it default to? But the settings on the transaction override that. Okay. So the pecking order there is Andar is going to look at the transaction. Actually, I'm going to skip that part. I'm going to shuffle this up a little bit. You can have default settings in your system preferences for what your general billing schedules are. Okay, so that is your last line of defense. If nothing is indicated, that's what's going to look at. You can have them on your campaign account, okay, which is going to override your system preferences. You can have them on an organization account. So that would be applicable to either the organization or its employees based on the transaction types you set up for that billing schedule. And then you have individual accounts, which would override even anything on their organization account or anything else. Those default billing schedules are just informing the transaction so that when you add a transaction, the transaction will be set up with those billing schedules by default, but you can still change them on the transaction. And when you change them on the transaction, that is what the statements are now listening to. So let's say I had a billing schedule of monthly last year for my individual to be billed donation, and I do rollover and I roll over my billing schedules, that billing schedule rolls over. But I go online and I donate and I say, actually, I want to give quarterly this year. That quarterly billing schedule on the transaction will override my monthly billing schedule because it's on the transaction specifically. Okay. Other questions?
Fantastic. Last one, just because we touched on it really briefly. This one comes from Tyler, which is, what is MIG?
Oh, what is MIG? MIG is our major individual giving module. It comes standard now as part of Andar. Some of our legacy systems still do not have MIG because it was originally marketed as a separate module. But it has key things like prospecting, it enhances plans, things like that. But the other things it does is it improves functionality across pretty much everything in the database. So if you've ever used a filter, you've used a sort tab, you've used any of our pre-made dashboards, most of that is not possible if you don't have MIG. So that is what MIG is. Yes. Awesome. All right. So, trucking along. Great questions. Best practices for running receipts. Okay, so I talked about that create statements job that is found in your main menu. And I quickly highlighted some of the options you have for selecting your accounts, etc. When you make those selections, save your parameters. There's a save button down at the bottom of that screen. And when you hit save, you can give it a name and you can say, these are our Tocqueville statements. These are our payroll statements. These are, and it will remember all of your settings so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you go to run statements. You can just choose the appropriate parameters and it will run that job for you. Okay. So it saves time and it saves brain power. Review the presentation settings. So again, in that create statements job, there are multiple tabs along the top. The first is where you select which transactions do you want to send statements for. The second tab is the presentation settings. So the presentation settings outlines all of the pecking orders that tell Andar which name to use, which salutation to use, which address to use, and which contact to send to if you're sending statements to organizations. So very, very important. A lot of times people will generate statements and they're like, what is this name that is pulling in? We go and we look at their presentation tab and it's pulling in some strange pecking order for names and it's pulling in their also known as name first rather than their combined giver name or their profile name. Okay, so really important to review that and get familiar with it. Sometimes we miss those little tabs along the top. Next one, consider emailing rather than sending by post. We did talk about that a little bit now. It's I don't know if anybody sent mass communication by postal mail lately. It's expensive. By the time you pay for envelopes, printing, and postage, that's a costly ordeal. Send them out by email. People get them in real time. You've got the flexibility to resend as many times as you want without any real additional cost other than your time. And as I mentioned, we now have that option to include a link where people can just pay in real time if you have ePledge. Okay. Again, reinforcing, if you try to email them out and somebody does not have an email address on their account or does not have a valid email address on their account, Andar will automatically generate a printable PDF for you. In those settings on the output tab, so we've got the rules of who we're sending statements to. We've got the presentation tab with all of the pecking orders. The next one is that output tab where I mentioned you say, I want a CSV, I want a PDF, I want a PDF, but I'm going to email it. There's also a section on there for contact rules. So you can tell the system, look at contact rules. If somebody has said, don't ever email me, then you can tell Andar, email out all of our statements, but don't email it to people who have said, don't email me. Okay. And it'll, again, just automatically create printable PDFs for those folks or vice versa. So contact rules are a great tool to help you navigate that if you're doing some type of combination between print and email. Another best practice, create a communication log. So there's a simple checkbox on that output tab. When you check it and put your name in there, it is going to create that comm log saying that the statement has gone out. Makes it really easy for everybody in your organization to see that continuity of all communications that have happened with a donor rather than having to look in multiple places. Okay. And set up click and paste statements. If you have ePledge, really easy to set up. It's a very quick and easy menu. Usually just like 2 options. And what is really nice in the system is if you hit that email statements button to send the statements by email, if it successfully emails them out, it will auto create a web user permission for that donor with the role of payee or payer. So it creates a web permission for them of payer. And when they click on the link in the email, the statement you have just sent them is already available digitally on the portal when they click on the link. They can review their statement and their outstanding balance, click, I want to pay this, and the system will generate a payment transaction with the same transaction type, the same account, same campaign account, same campaign year, and apply the payment rather than creating an additional pledge and you having to manually match them up. So I see a lot of our customers who will send statements out, but they redirect people to their website to make a payment. That creates an extra pledge. It's potentially a different pledge type. It's potentially a different campaign year, campaign account. Don't do that. If you've got ePledge, set up this click and pay. Okay. I know we did a session on this at last year's conference. So if you're at last year's conference, I'm not sure if you still have access to those recordings, but that is there. And again, we do have a statement training session during the upcoming conference in April. And that is one of the things that will be covered. I don't know if she'll be going into full detail of setting up the click and pay, but definitely the basics of it. And it's super easy. Okay. Luke, questions?
We just had the one, but I believe you just hit on it, which was how difficult is it to set up click and pay statements?
Yeah,
But I think you hit on that.
surprisingly easy. Somebody asked me about it once before I'd ever set it up, and I went, grabbed the instructions, and I think it took me 10 minutes to set up. The caveat being I have 20 years of experience in Andar. I work with ePledge all the time. But again, even when I'm setting it up with customers, start to finish, definitely less than an hour to have that up and running and them knowing what buttons to push to trigger those. Okay. All right, so moving along. Other notes. There is a statements dashboard available. So if you have not yet seen, if you go to user customization, bio tab and dashboard maintenance in your main menu, down in the bottom right corner, there is a button that says install from Andar. What that allows you to do when you click it, it's going to show you a list of all of the bio tabs and dashboards that Andar has pre-made that you can just add to your system. There is one in there for statements. Okay. So at the top, there's a brief introduction to statements. There is a link to our online documentation. You have a list of all of your issued statements, and then that create statement job I talked about, your billing schedule report, your statement template maintenance, it all lives on that dashboard. So it just streamlines that process a little bit for you. Okay, so number one of my other note, best practices, get that dashboard. Number two, develop a monthly process. So the most common billing schedule that is used is monthly. So make that part of the monthly, whatever else you do monthly, particularly in finance, add running statements to that list and come up with what your guidelines are. Pledges are most likely to be fulfilled when they are followed up regularly and on a predictable basis. Okay. We all anticipate our phone bill. We all anticipate our electrical bill. This should be on a set framework, just like that. Okay. Statements can be viewed online. So again, if you set up that click and pay, you can actually have all of the statements listed that they've ever received from you so they can review them. There's a summary tab that shows them their outstanding balance and they can make a payment. Statements can also be viewed if you're using ePledge. If you have the account history menu option where people can see their most recent transactions, statements can also be added to that page. So if that is of interest to you, it's in our documentation on our support center, but it's just an option that you would turn on to say, yes, allow them to see statements on there as well. That does require you to be running statements. It doesn't generate a new statement for them, but every time you run the create statements job, if that person is in that job, it'll keep a copy of the statement there that they can go grab. And then consider going paperless. And I already talked about this a couple of times, but man, I sent out baby shower invites about a month ago for my daughter. it was expensive. So yeah, again, save yourself some time, save yourself some money, and get those emailed out and make it that much easier for your donors to make those payments as well. All right. Then I have some additional resources. So again, you'll get this PowerPoint sent out to you later. Check out our support center. We've got more information about statements there. Encourage you to join the Slack community. Ask other people what they're doing. Statement templates are exportable and importable. So if you have a nearby organization or partner organization who is also using Andar, ask them if what their statement template looks like, what their receipt template looks like. They can export that, including their style sheet. You can import it, and then you can just finesse it a little bit instead of starting from scratch. If you would like to book training or professional services, we've got sales email address there. And if you run into any trouble, never hesitate to reach out to our help desk. They are awesome.